Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. And this is one of my favorite episode styles, which is hot seats with two incredible friends of mine and community members, Lauren and Andi. And this episode is fun and juicy and in a couple of different buckets. Number one, the first question I was asked, if you were building a community from scratch, how would you do it? And we started unpacking from there what's required, what to focus on, the mistakes that I made, the mistakes that I've seen made. And then we ended up in the bucket of relationships and how to navigate the best of them, and even in the season of alignment as an entrepreneur. So we talk about how building a community requires creating a shared vision and involving the community in the decision-making process, how consistency and small steps are the key to building healthy and long-term relationships, how releasing expectations and practicing vulnerability can help overcome past traumas and improve connections, how an awareness of patterns and making different choices are essential for personal growth and building strong relationships. Relationships, business relationships, team relationships, interpersonal relationships are guaranteed to have roadblocks and challenges, but navigating them and communicating effectively can lead to deeper connections and drastic results that we're looking for. One of my favorite quotes that you've heard me say too many times, how relationships happen for a reason, a season, or lifetime, and it's our responsibility to pour into them. How self-love and self-care are essential in maintaining healthy relationships, and how there is absolutely no one-size-fits-all approach to running a business, and individuals like yourself should embrace your unique way of doing things to allow you the best chance of building your business and your vision. So there's that and so much more, and it's me with three incredibly powerful women, Ashley, Andi, and Lauren. And so without further ado, have a pen, have a paper, or get ready to listen to this one a few times, but let's get into the episode. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show, and we might as well just call this the Couch of George and all the powerful women, because I am one of the girls today, but let's just be honest, that is where I spend most of my time. And dudes, I'm sorry if you listen to this, I'm just going to cut to the end. Women are always right, so pay attention more, because I've learned a whole lot by listening to women, and especially these three women on the podcast today. And so we have another one of those magical hot seat episodes where we have some of our incredibly powerful community members and my partner in crime, the absolute queen of turtles, emails, coffee, love, food delivery, everything that you can imagine. Just the world's best professional, heart-centered problem solver, mom, CEO extraordinaire, Ashley. Ashley, stoked to have you again today and for us to do this. How are you doing, girl?
Oh, we are caffeinated and ready.
We
I
are,
am ready to
yes.
rock and roll.
Yeah. I actually, you know what I feel like? I don't think we've ever done a two-word check-in on the podcast, have we?
It's been a hot moment.
It has been a hot moment. Actually, before I even introduce the next two guests, which I will in a second, I'm going to let them each do a two-word check-in, because what'd you say yours were? Caffeinated and what?
Ready.
Caffeinated and ready.
Yeah.
Oh man, I feel like I wanted to echo yours. I'll say excited, and under caffeinated, because I'm definitely under
Mm.
caffeinated today. Andi, I'm going to let you go. What are your two words for us to start today?
Oh man, honored
Mm,
and up leveling.
honored and up leveling. Yeah, I'm here for that. And then Lauren, what you got?
I am grateful and clear headed.
Ooh, I'll take that. I'll take that. So, to kind of set some context, we have two of our incredible alliance members, but also two women that I highly, highly admire and respect. And Lauren and I have a lot of business time and life together, because she is an absolute BA when it comes to business and ops. And actually, I don't know anything that you're not good at, so you're going to have to hit that part if that comes up. Because now that I think about it, everything I was thinking about, I was like, no, she does that. She helped with that. She did that. And then Andi, on the other side, I feel like has an answer to every single challenge that ever pops up, but not even like a short answer, like a very thorough, like, here's exactly what to do. Here's how to do it. Here's how you get out of it. And I don't know the encyclopedia that's in your brain, Andi, but I am highly impressed with it. And now, just for everybody listening to this, if you're watching, I also have a little bit of nerves happening, because the shelves behind Andi are just Velcroed to the wall, and now I'm aware of it, and I'm looking at the stuff on the shelves, and I just don't know if we're gonna have a pattern interruptive, the Velcro shelves falling off. But she's also surrounded by like an incredible book that I love, Breathe by James Nestor, and my buddy Alex Sharfin has some paintings in the background over there that he sent out. So my heart's like super, super happy. So ladies, I am honored to have you today. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much for having
Thank
us.
you.
Of course, of course. So here's what we're gonna do. For everybody listening, I'm gonna let each of them introduce themselves, just so you kind of have some context of like who they are, their genius in the world, their gifts in the world. And Ash and I'll wrap it up. You know who I am, hopefully, and if you don't, it's probably better that way. You know who Ash is. She keeps the wheels on the road. And then we're gonna do a question from each of them. And then we're also going to share golden nuggets. And I'm actually really, really excited to hear both of their golden nuggets. And just so everybody knows before the show, I'm not briefed on these. I don't ask. So it's just as much as a surprise to me as it is to you. And so I just try to keep the car on the road. And if you haven't listened to the previous episode where we had the Josh twins on, not really twins, but they kind of are, and they're friends in life now. The table got flipped on me, and I was the one in the hot seat. And so who knows what's coming up today, but I hope it'll be a wild ride. It'll be fun. It'll be valuable. It'll be amazing. And so, Andi, I would love it if you could kind of give everybody an intro, who you are, your magic in the world, what you do.
All right. So, oh man, at the moment, what I do is I work with kids with big emotions. And it's been a journey to get here. Basically, my son was born with a really messed up stress system because I was in burnout when he was born. And that led me to helping us working with first responders and getting the best education in stress systems and sleep I could have possibly gotten. Through that journey, my son was struggling, neurodiverse, brain is phenomenal, smart kid, major outbursts, anxiety, all of that stuff out there. So while I was doing all this stress system stuff, I was still missing pieces. So I brought in the trauma informed piece as an IFS and a trauma informed coach. And then I'm still missing pieces with him, which is now where Ashley and I have been diving deep into executive functioning, which is another huge piece. So I'm bringing, there's never a piece to the puzzle. So I keep bringing these pieces in that I'm now work with neurodiverse kids with big emotions, helping not only the kids, but the parents as well.
And I just want to add this on here, and I'll be the first one to own it as an entrepreneur. And I think most entrepreneurs that experience anything in their life, I am just a giant kid with big emotions that, quite frankly, has been pushed into neurodivergence and ADHD. And so it's probably why everything that you ever say tickles my heart. And I'm like, God, that landed. Oh, that landed. Okay, I'm going to take that into practice. And so when you say IFS, you mean internal family systems?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go ahead.
And what you said as well about neurodiverse, most entrepreneurs are neurodiverse. We are the people that are going to change the world because our brains think different and we think out of the box. And society doesn't have the capabilities for that. So it's time for us to learn how to manage that and to own it and love who we are and be in our power with that.
And so, yeah, so I have a big soft spot for Andi as a vet and plenty of friends that are first responders and really genuinely anybody. The reason I'm saying this is because so much of what she shares and what she helps kids with are 100% the same exact thing that we experience as adult entrepreneurs, except we try to justify our way out of it. But the solutions are just as simple and we just have to follow them. And so I wanted to hit that real quick, and I'll put myself on the chopping block. I'm like, yep, thank you, got it. I'm just a giant 6-year-old. I don't wear diapers anymore, but there would be times that would be convenient too. But that's a whole different podcast. So we'll keep that one. And Lauren, based on your flinchy face, I think it's a perfect time to let you give context.
Well, I am, it took me many years to figure out how to say this, but I am a creative consultant and brand strategist. That is how to sort of take everything that I know and bundle it up in a nice, neat package. But basically, I have worked in luxury goods, outdoor apparel, gym apparel, and I specialize mostly in apparel, but I enjoy the operation side of creative and business and how they kind of merge together. And that's kind of where I sit these days.
Okay, so what did you say? What was it? Creative
Consultant.
and brand strategist?
Yes.
I feel like that's a good wrapping paper for your toolbox, but also I feel like I need to add that when you open that toolbox, you can also do every function underneath it, from branding and marketing and design and operations and logistics and fulfillment. And you tend to embody that jack of all trades quote, but the full one, that oftentimes better than a master of one. Like, I feel like that's a really good wrapping paper for you, but also genuinely, I don't think I have yet to find a tool missing in your toolbox. I'm like, Lauren, you're like, I can do that. I know that person. I got that. And so I just wanted to add a little bit of oomph to that.
Yeah. I feel like I never want to say I know everything, but I've touched upon a lot of different parts of my career, especially in the business side of it. And when you merge business and creative together, you kind of get a unique viewpoint. So that's kind of where I sit these days.
I love it. I love it. And since we are ready to go, I'm just going to kind of jump right into it because I'm going to have you go first anyway. So I'm ready to be shocked, hopefully surprised, and hopefully have something to add to your question.
Okay. So the question is, if you were to build a community from scratch all over again, knowing everything you know right now, how would you do it?
Oh, if I was to build a community from scratch, starting all over again, knowing what I know now, how would I do it?
And taking into account your customer journey steps.
What a good question. What a good question. My smart aleck answer is I wouldn't, but I'm joking.
That's not the answer.
I think the easiest way I want to attack this, and I absolutely love this question. I think I want to talk about the mistakes that I've made in 20 years of doing this when it comes to building communities, because I feel like it'll invert into a whole lot better um, answer that we can lay out. So I think the number one biggest mistake that I've made in doing this, and that I would very much recommend people be aware of, is thinking communities are built by one person. And when I say that, I will genuinely acknowledge that even to this day, I struggle with the imposter syndrome and the belief that if it's not me doing it or driving it or running it, that it's not being built as a community. And so very early on, every time I've done this, I've gotten to a point where I'm like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. But the truth is that I was just continuing to try to do it on my own, to have all the answers, to think of the perfect plan, to be able to check every box instead of utilizing the power of the community itself, which brings me to mistake number two. Communities are not built on our vision, they're built on a shared vision. And that being the second biggest mistake that I've made is thinking that when I would build a community, that the way that I designed it or saw it was the way that it was going to go forever, and then being afraid, and I mean petrified, to make adjustments because I didn't know what the vision would look like. And so my level of fear and insecurity and unknowingness would guide me to just kind of keep hammering something home that didn't need to be hammered home anymore, diluting the community. And so the solution to that is involving the community as much as possible and creating a shared vision through feedback and collaboration. And so mistake number one, doing it all on my own. Mistake number two, having it be my vision instead of a shared vision. And then mistake number three is that when you plant a seed in the garden, if you don't water the seed, it will never grow. And communities are only as strong as our current focus on them. And they're genuinely like a garden. They require input and intentionality and consistency to keep them going. And I made the drastic mistake of like, oh, and even with our alliance in the early stages, and Ash and I have talked about this a ton, like, oh, I recorded 30 videos. The onboarding's great. It's here. It's going to run itself. And now I'm in the version of like, oh, I'm going to be re-recording these things for the rest of my life because the alliance isn't going anywhere. And I genuinely love it. And then the fourth biggest mistake is not being very transparent and open about the vision, which created the inability to make adjustments to the feedback. And this is something that I still genuinely work through as a muscle, where even a couple of months ago where we did a focus call and I was like, how could the content be better? Straight panic attack before that call. Straight panic attack. Because the inner dialogue is like, but I thought I made it. And like, I thought it was so good and I thought it was landing. But there's so many different learning styles and people and stages that it really is an incredible gift to get feedback and make adjustments and iterations. And the way that I now tend to think about communities is genuinely like a beautiful 50-acre garden in my backyard. And I think that leads me to the last point, which is trying to launch something too big that gets in the way of the foundations being created that could make it big. And so to kind of summarize all of those, and I think I remember all of my points, Number one is create a vision that you have the ability to see, but also find people that you are aligned with that have the ability to give inputs to create a shared vision in the beginning. Those people that give you inputs, enroll them into the vision and be open and willing to ask for support and feedback for them to be a part of that, to be garden tenders and help make adjustments and tell you when the weather's rolling in. In doing that, design it in a way where consistency can be protected and not intensity so that you do not burn out. Be very, very openly excited that you're going to adjust it numerous times and fall in love with the iterative process. And then number 5 is earn the right to make it big, because a community can only be as big as its strong foundation of members. And the members of a community is what drives its growth. And that is something that I'm learning, as you guys know, in the Alliance. Like, the Alliance wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Ashley and Ashley, both of you, who contribute so massively and so powerfully. And I'm getting actually emotional thinking about it, which I'm just super grateful for. But also, for me, as a community isn't perfect. It's a shared idea. It's a shared vision. And it allows us the space to be human in front of it, which I think the big final mistake that I've made is thinking that I had to have it all figured out and I couldn't share where I was in my own journey. And I think running a community, being an effective community leader, means being a leader. And being a leader means being human. And being human means that you're going to get on calls in your community and you're going to spend 35 minutes telling everybody about your personal life. And then they're going to give you feedback. They're like, hey, we love hearing about it, but like, can we get to the meat of the call? And I'm like, oh, good feedback. Thanks. But also thanks for holding space for me. And then just being willing to constantly be in that adjustment bucket of where we go and how we get there. And I think the final note before I interact with you, Lauren, because it is just flowing out of me right now, is that the community is never about the content that's created in it. The content sets context. That's what the content does. The content sets context for shared vision, shared contribution, shared support. And I think our job in building communities is to create a container, just like Andi would talk about with a room full of neurodivergent kids, that puts bumpers and safety nets around them, but then allows them agency to operate within it, to then be able to make adjustments as we go. And so at a very high level, that's what I got. Does that make sense, Lauren?
Absolutely. It does make sense.
Ash, do you have anything to add to that?
So 2 themes that I would love to pick out of what you said was a level of being unattached. So obviously, like, we can get very attached to that big vision of what it's going to look like. And I know, like, we've even talked about it before of like, well, it's going to look this way and it's going to have pink wrapping paper and blue polka dots and all the things. And we're like, oh, wait a second. No, it's actually going to be stripes and it's going to be green and it's going to look like this. And so being unattached, and then also something that you've talked about a lot before, even on the podcast, is just like earning the right to make it complex. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned like earning the right to make it big, but we also get to earn the right to add more, to make it more complex, to add the other platform, to add the other thing, and just go all in on just one concept, idea, community, place.
Yeah, I really, really love that. Lauren, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
I feel like another thing that I pulled out of it is the leadership aspect of it, because you are the person at the top, so to speak. And this is the team that you have, quote unquote, assembled at that point. And so by doing so, you're allowing yourself to grow in a different way, but have people contribute to you in a way that you might not have gotten from like an average coworker of some sorts. It's almost like it makes the playing field very even. In a way, you're just at the head of the ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Andi, do you have anything to add from your perspective, since you're in ours? And also,
Yeah, I had 2 things. I have actually a question that came out of it, but I also had something to add. So the something to add was when you're saying as well about changing things, that quite often something that a pitfall we all get in is that we feel we almost need to start from scratch, pull everything out and change it. start everything over, or look at the problems and focus on the problems. But I mean, I've told you about this book before, Switch, from Dan and Chip Heath. It's honestly one of my most favorite books. And Jonah Berger was Chip's student. Mm-hmm. So from the catalyst that you speak of, so it's the same wavelength on that. And what they talk about is when there is something that somebody is struggling with, find out what is working. Mm-hmm. So find out what is working. So the quick and dirty example, the one in the book, is where in the beginning, this man, only one man, a nutritionist, has to go into a third world country, into this really tiny town, and figure out how to help their nutrition. And he went, they don't have money, they don't have resources. What are they going to do? Like how you would normally solve that problem. And so he started finding out what kids are actually of a healthy weight. And he started finding out what they did. And then he got those parents to tell the other parents, so that everybody bought in. So like that book to me is so phenomenal, because it's not about starting from scratch. It's when there's a problem, when things aren't working, when we need to pivot, what was working. And that's where what you've done with your focus groups, you always ask us, what is working for you guys? What don't you like? You ask the don't, but your focus isn't always on it's what don't you like? How do you want it better? Or where can we pivot so that it's working, or what is already working? And so it's really important to not drop the balls on the things that are working.
I love that. And before you ask your question, there's 3 questions that I got to give full credit to a personal development coach like 15 years ago, because I think it applies so much to the point you just made from Switch. Is the 3 questions were always the same, and they went in this order. What is currently working? What is not working? And what are the 3 things I'm committing to do differently to take action on next? And those 3 are like the best current staters of like, got it, and also keeps it chunked down to iterations, because iterations are guaranteed. Business, community, customer journey, clients, relationships, it's just a part of the process. So I actually love that. And I think you've told me that before, but that makes so much more sense that Jonah was a client of Chip, and I've read all of those, but that vein just connected in my brain. So thank you for that. And what was the question that you had come up out of it?
So, oh goodness, I just wrote down a really couple of words to remind me. Being vulnerable, that was it. You talked about in building your community and being vulnerable. So that is one where I personally have been trying to navigate. I know I've asked an RBA about this, because my son is neurodiverse. My son's the one with the outburst. My son's the one that doesn't want me talking about him. My son. So like, how do you navigate the vulnerability and talking? Like, I wanted to go on and talk about how well my son did yesterday when we went to this animal sanctuary and there weren't cats. We wanted cats. It was all dogs, and their website still shows the cats, but there's none there. And there was also things for his nervous system, all the barking of the dogs. And there's just different things where his nervous system normally would have gone into explosion, and he didn't. And I wanted to come on and talk about how the groundwork we've laid over the years is how it's paying off. And I'm like, but how do I do this? And when the vulnerability isn't necessarily me, like I can talk about the adult part of it, but how do I help with the child part of it?
That's a great question, and I'm actually super glad you asked. I was texting a client about this yesterday. The way that I answered this was actually same personal development coach from 15 years ago. I think vulnerability might be misdefined a ton. I think a lot of times people have it intermixed with intimacy, and it ends up being about the details of the story rather than the outcomes and feelings and actions associated with it. And so the really easy tilt is, if we're ever not using the word I think, I feel, I experienced, we're probably dancing in the wrong bucket. And so obviously with a child who has expressed like, and I have another client who has the same exact thing, who's expressed like, I don't want you to talk about this, or I don't want you to share this. Well, option number 1 is like, what are you comfortable with me sharing? And are you okay if I share my perspective and I leave out details, or, XYZ, and you find that barometer. But then the second part is that you have the ability to share the experience, but through your lens of what you've noticed and what you've laid in your perspectives and your foundations, which can still give context and meaning and not necessarily make it all about the details. And then another way that's really, really easy, and this comes up in business a lot, is like I have a lot of clients that have had tremendous, and I mean tremendous, breakthroughs and revenue things and all of it. Some I will not, and I've said this to people, unless they publicly acknowledge that I did it or I was a part of it, you will never hear me publicly acknowledge that I had anything to do with it. And so I use the lens of like neutrality and like anonymity. And I'm like, well, client A and client B. And so it's finding what feels the best that still allows the point or the outcome or the actions to be understood without necessarily making it about the details. And so for me, even intrapersonally, in relationships, I find myself just like every other human where like if I haven't seen somebody in a while, I so instantly want to like catch up on gossip. And I'm like, oh, this happened. And then I felt, I think, I experienced, and the I barometer keeps me in check to only be in the current moment, sharing the lessons and the takeaways or the potential perspective shifts without making it about like that previous moment or that previous experience. So does that help?
Yes. Yeah. I guess the thing that just pops up in my head from that though is that, well, for me, it's struggling if I do say, because I have tried on my podcast and stuff, I say my client, and sometimes they are my clients. Sometimes it is my own personal experience, but sometimes I slip. And I'm just worried too that in posts, I guess for me too, I'm not good at lying. So when I'm saying my client, I feel like I'm lying and I feel like I'm breaking a value to my clients as well. So it's trying to navigate.
Well, and that's a really good awareness to have too, right? Because there's a part of it where like I don't actually like I can genuinely say this. None of my clients would ever be upset if I share, but I also ask all of them permission. But I also will acknowledge personally, I'm like, hey, I'm going to share this case study and I'm going to make up a completely different business so you can't figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not lying to you. I'm doing this to protect them. And I just acknowledge the feeling that I'm having, which allows me to feel like I'm in integrity and also give the meat of the takeaways without necessarily doing that. And so I think it's a muscle of like what genuinely feels the best for you. Just like obviously like people are going to know you're talking about your children potentially, or somebody else's. And so there's that level where we have to find it and we have to feel like we're in alignment and in integrity. But I would say that like you're not a liar if you're protecting anonymity. I just find that acknowledging that I'm choosing to do that is what makes me feel better about it versus like my client, like, hey, I'm sharing my client because I don't feel comfortable in our relationship sharing their specific story. And I want to keep it this way. And that always allows me to feel better about it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it's kind of perfect because it's your question anyways.
Yes. So do I get another question then? Because I feel like that was a big one. Okay. Okay. So it was actually tough finding a question for this because I came into RBA when I came into RBA, it was huge for me because I have a lot of past traumas with connection. I've realized through a lot of working on myself and a lot of dealing with what I didn't even realize I had childhood traumas, because they weren't what I would think were the big T traumas that you think like I was never hit. Right. And so through going through all of that, I realized that I have never learned how to have really good relationships. I've often put up walls. I've often blocked, having to protect myself, working with first responders as well before the pandemic. And throughout the pandemic was a big experience for me as well, where I didn't have the tools and skills to be able to manage. I was so cautious as to what I said and what I did to not, be like pooped on, to have any negativity coming towards me. And it's just this fine road that I was following. And so I've worked on a lot of that. So coming into the RBA, my biggest thing was being able to start learning how to build connections and be okay, like be in a way that was healthy and long-term, that I'm like good at creating all these connections. So I've been working on that, which I guess my question is for somebody that is coming through that and is learning that, do you have some advice like I've kind of come that far that I'm now like kicking butt in my business, right? Like I'm building connections, everyone's coming through. So, but advice too for somebody who is stuck at that point. Advice for somebody that is actually dealing with past traumas that have had them struggle with creating those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
What advice, thoughts, what brilliance can you?
Well, I love this question. And for everybody listening, I just want to clean up one thing that you said so it makes sense. When you said big T trauma, what she's talking about is big T, meaning like very outward facing external events that a lot of people would recognize as like getting hit, emotionally abused, verbally abused, physically abused, any of those buckets. And then little T trauma being a lot of like inner stuff, like a teacher telling you, how dare you not get an A, and any of the things that we internalize, just for people listening. And I love that you asked this question. And I just want to caveat this, that like, I can only speak from my own personal experience, and I know I coach on this a lot, and I know I talk about this a lot with relationships with people, but by no means am I a psychologist, am I a psychiatrist, am I any of those. My lens into trauma is basically living it and walking through the other side. And so this is my perspective of this, for everybody listening. I think, number one, if you ever seen the movie What About Bob, it's baby steps over and over and over again, and it's consistency. And so I think one of the traps that I fell into was being somebody who struggled with connections and struggled with building relationships. Unless they were agendized, or there was like a finish line to them, or there was this clear outcome, the two most important things that supported me were, number one, releasing expectations for myself and not putting those on other people, which came down to like, I can only pour into this as much as I can pour in, but what is reciprocated on the other side has nothing to do with me and isn't the reason I'm building the relationship in the first place. And then number two is consistency, but consistency in the lens of small bites, not big bites. And it's almost like learning how to walk as a child. Like, before you walk, you learn how to prop your body up. Once you can prop your body up, you start kind of crawling around the floor. Once you start crawling, you start putting your hands on the table. Once you're standing on the table, you get daring to take those first couple steps. And then we all know, once they take those steps, you better baby proof the whole house, because they're going to run into so many walls and so many corners. And then they're going to learn those lessons, and then they're going to make adjustments and be able to run and operate as, bipod human beings. And I feel like for me, I as well, and even up until a couple of years ago, was basically getting 15 years of feedback at how bad I was at relationships, how agendized I was, how I was out of integrity, how I hurt people's feelings. And the hardest part for me is none of it was intentional. I didn't know. I wasn't thinking like that. I didn't have an awareness. And then this brings me to the 4 stages of competence, which I talk about all the time, right? And the easiest summary of these, and if you've ever heard these, you can Google them, but it's unconscious incompetence and then gubs. But the easy label is ignorance, right? And then awareness, then learning, and then mastery, right? And it goes in those 4 orders. And I don't like the word ignorance. I like unaware. The moment you become aware of a pattern, you become aware of something in a relationship, you've actually won the game, meaning you found the pattern, but the game has just begun, because the 2 most important buckets are learning and mastery, and learning and mastery. And so when you find that awareness, it's about simply making different choices and actions. And sometimes for me, that's like this morning, realizing that like I was feeling overwhelmed in life and I ignored all the text messages on my phone. And instead of making it wrong, I'm like, no, I can take the weekend off. Like, I can be with my son. But then this morning I was still feeling heavy, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And I was like, oh, I just need to clean this up. Hey, got it. Boom. Here. How are you? Following up on this. Sorry, it took me a week to get back to you. And that's the learning phase. And the learning phase is constantly flexing that muscle to build momentum. Number one, consistently, but number two, releasing an expectation of what happens on the other side. And I think for me personally, the thing that I've learned is that most of the quote unquote expectations that I've painted, or the worst case scenarios that I've doomsdayed, or the rumination that I've been stuck in, was only happening on my side and was never true on the other side. And so where it's led me to now is that I've learned to not make up story unless I directly ask, or I literally operate in, we're great, until you tell me we're not. And when you tell me you're not, I operate to bring it right back into great as fast as possible, which I believe is me working through like all that residue and fear and control, and then being like, no relationship's perfect. Our relationships with our kids aren't perfect. Our relationship with our friends aren't perfect. I mean, Ashley and I have walked through thousands of roller coasters together, but every time we do, we develop a deeper relationship and we make adjustments to how that relationship goes. And I realized the biggest mistake I made for so long was keeping myself off the field of being in that experience to be able to deepen my relationships. And so I think the game is understanding that when we find a pattern, when we realize like, oh, I've struggled to connect, or I don't know what to say, or I don't know how to connect with that person, my default is just saying that to you. And I've said it to Lauren, and I'm like, I don't know how else to say this, but like, this is what's coming up for me. And like, I just feel like I have to say this. And she's like, thank you so much for saying. And like, we're great friends now. And in my relationships and my romantic ones, and even with my son, and I practice this a lot with him, where like, I will catch myself throughout the day, like filling his bucket over an overabundant amount, which means I'm coming from lack and I'm trying to give it away. And I'm like, hey buddy, how's your bucket? He's like, full, daddy. And I was like, if I said too much today, he's like, yeah, dad, are you good? I'm like, yeah, daddy was making up a story that you were unhappy or that you were blank. And he's like, no, dad. And I try to find the root cause as much as possible so that I can rewrite that story for myself and then make adjustments. And so I think for me personally, I've realized that I get to be in relationships, and relationships are going to have road bumps and speed blocks and speed bumps and roadblocks, speed bumps and roadblocks. And the faster I can find them, but also willingly walk in them with a level of excitement, the deeper the relationships I get to build on the other side. And the one thing that keeps coming to me is that quote that a shaman said to me years ago, where he said, relationships happen for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And the part that I added is that the choice isn't up to me, but the responsibility to pour into it from my side is mine. And what happens past that point is just for me to observe and make adjustments to. And so I feel like it's genuinely a game of learning how to walk as a baby and being able to remember that the more we walk, the better we're going to get, but we're not going to not bump into the wall or smash our head on the corner. But when we do that, it's how we adjust to that, how we communicate that, that allows us to be in that process. And even with clients, and even in co-working, and even in meetings, and even at events, it changes. And I think the true understanding is that if it's not changing, I'm still stuck in a pattern because it means I'm not growing. And if I'm realizing it's changing, my needs are changing, then it's my responsibility to communicate those and then make adjustments to those. And then whatever follows is really just new information for me to decide, how do I navigate this relationship? So that's the only way that I can answer that.
Amazing. Thank you.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, it's as you're saying this, I'm like, okay, I know this stuff now. I wish I had heard this years ago, when I didn't know how to have really, like, I did not have role models growing up to teach me how to have healthy relationships. So what you just gave is a really great recipe on what it is to be on this side of a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
So,
And I'll even add, like, even in my personal relationship, the other side of that is like, I'm really good at pouring into people now. Like, it's where I found my healing. Like, most of the customer journey models were models I made for myself to make sure I was effectively communicating in a way that was rewriting all the feedback that I got for years. So like, when I acknowledge you, it means I'm making it about you, and I prepare you for what I'm going to talk about. I'm making sure that we mutually agree. When I project, I'm sharing what my potential intention is. When I pre-handle, I'm like, hey, here's exactly like how we communicate. Like, hey, I'm in this with you and I love you. And I'm like, can we talk? And they're like, yeah. I became so good at rewriting my trauma and rewriting all those challenges in my relationship that a new one appeared. And the new one is, George, oh, here it comes. George still doesn't know how to ask for things in return or communicate my needs. Because now when I do that, I feel like a taker. Because I went all the way to the other side. And so then the default new one is the self-sacrifice one where, oh, I'm only as good of what I can pour in, but I never get to ask back. And that's been the one I've been finding this year. And I love people in my life, and Ash has said to me many times, and she's like, it's not what you do, it's just who you are that I love, and I'll be in with you. But that muscle's new because that's the really deep level of being seen. And so that's the one that I'm currently practicing. And like, this is going to sound really silly, but I have to practice this with my 7-year-old son. And I'm like, hey, buddy, like, it would mean the world to daddy if we could do this. And he's like, okay, daddy. And then like the rest of the day he follows suit, and the kid's like, filling my bucket and hitting my love languages. But I think to even tie it into your earlier question is there's no finish line. It's the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, over and over. And even in the competence matrix, what's happened is I was unaware that I had those patterns. I became aware. I put them into learning, and then I mastered them on the giving side, and then it unlocked a new unawareness, which was, the receiving side. And now I'm going through that, and then going through that in my closest relationships. And I'll even speak to the fact that, like, most of you know TJ, he's in the Alliance, he was at the event. TJ is my number one best friend, but he's the real, like, one of the real only true best friends I've ever had, that we have a mutually beneficial male relationship that pours into each other on values. And that muscle is new for me in connecting with men at that deep level. And so it's just this falling in love with the process. And it's almost like re-loving this little 6-year-old boy that's like, hey, it's okay to ask him to play kickball with you. And even if he says no, it doesn't mean nobody wants to play kickball with you. And it doesn't mean no forever. It might just mean no right now. And then I still get to stay in that game. And so I also want to say this to everybody listening, is I get labeled as good at this stuff and all of it. I don't have any of it figured out. I'm just smashing my head into the corners of the desk a ton and trying to figure it out as fast as possible. But I think it's really important to understand that, and me as a man of faith, like, my job is to be useful, but also to be in love with myself and God and show up. And I don't think there should ever be a finish line. I don't think that exists. I think it's a constant deepening of ourself and what we give away. And so I absolutely love that question, Andi. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for having the experiences you've had and being open to sharing them with us so that we can also learn and grow as well.
Yeah. It's been powerful. Ash, do you have anything to add to that? Because I feel like you do.
I would just love to publicly acknowledge you, Andi, for being such an incredible friend. And to say I was a little shocked that you would ask that question is probably an understatement, because I think you are incredible. You see me so well, just even in how you have supported me through the past couple of weeks, how you have helped like support Nick and like life transitions and the conversations that we've had. It comes and it looks so effortless on the receiving side that I never would have thought that it would be something that you would see yourself as struggling with. And so I just want you to know that I fully see you, and that I will be so happy to consistently acknowledge you and just share with you all the time just how grateful of a friend I am for you, or you are to me, however you want to put that, right? We're just friends. And just thank you.
And
because I think you're incredible.
Yeah, and Ash and Andi, I'll very publicly say this. I have screenshots of you on my phone of messages that you've sent me, because you also came in the Alliance at a dark time in my life, and without knowing took the time to pour into me and to acknowledge me in the same way. And I feel like you and I are way more similar than we might have even realized until this conversation. But like, I get it, and I thank you, right? And you have a giant heart, and I appreciate all that you pour and all that you give, and all of that. And I will echo what Ashley said, because like, genuinely, and I will say this, you have genuinely increased the depth of our community and the love and the example that you are, and the way that you play and the way that you show up, and like your family. And so like, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lauren, do you have any wisdom to add to this? Because you and I have had some of these deep talks.
So a couple of things I was thinking about is one, I think that it's really important for us to ask for what we need. My therapist has recently just told me this. And just to personally disclose, I had really bad back pain, and I needed to ask my chiropractor for an out of office visit. That's the kind of pain I was in, very emergency like. And she said, if you're in that much pain, why are you not asking? I said, well, I feel really bad for asking. And she goes, why? You need it. Like, you need it. I said, well, I feel really bad for asking. I never want to ask. And I'm not that type of person where I'm going to, pull from everybody's resources that way. So for me to ask for help is obviously really difficult as it is. But when I did, he was like, Lauren, of course I would have helped you. I would rather work on you for 20 minutes than work on 20 other people for 5 minutes each. And so that's one thing to think about. But the second thing is, also remember, expectations lead to disappointments. It's the thing I say over and over again. And I think that when we go into relationships and we expect to receive something from them, that's already the wrong thing, because you're just going to continue to be disappointed over time. If you go into a relationship and you say, I don't need anything from you, I just want to be here, I just want to be part of your orbit, I just want to be part of your world, I think that that's where we become a little bit, it's easier for us to understand and easier for us to build relationships that way as well. So to that point, Andi, I agree. I would never have pegged you for somebody who had a problem or issues with trying to build relationships, because you're just so naturally good at it.
Thank you. It's one of these things where I believe that when you are told something so many times, it's hard to change those patterns, of which I'm doing, and which RBA has been like, oh my gosh, George, like, I just appreciate so much the safe space that you created for me to come in and start practicing tearing down walls and building communication. Like the people in RBA, just the person, like Ash, you had a post asking for us to connect with new people for like the coffee chats and stuff again. I'm like, I've connected with almost everybody in here already. I'm like, and you actually found somebody that I hadn't. And I'm like, this is so cool. But I made a point when I was in RBA, I'm going to put the effort in, I'm going to work those muscles and start changing that neural pathway that, like, the last 50 years of my life has been in a different pathway. And I'm like, no, I'm changing that neural pathway and I'm going this different direction. I think the thing that George really touched on here is for people that were not taught growing up how to do that. George gave this great framework today. So I'm very appreciative of that, George. It's the framework that has taken me a lot of years and time to start trying to figure out how do I communicate? How do I be a friend, right? Like, coaching comes natural. I've just always been a coach my whole life. But as a child, that was squashed as well, right? So It's just fascinating that, what these neural pathways will do, and we can all create new ones. And the RBA has been my safe space for that. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And just because the marketer entrepreneur me has to tie them together, the answer to your question also delivers into the leadership of community that Lauren asked earlier. And for people listening to this and feeling this, no different than how you communicate with your team, how you communicate with your customers, how you communicate with people in your business, acquaintances, other B2B businesses that you're in the game with. Like, the secret is relationships, and depth is truly, truly the secret. And it's a muscle, and it's one that gets to be flexed. And I don't think that there's ever a quote unquote finish line, nor a point where you're like, oh, I've nailed it, because it's not even just about connecting. It's connecting and then watering and then reconnecting and recommitting and doing it again and doing it again and doing it again. But I believe that that's alignment at the deepest level, where this vein carries all the way through. And even in big companies, like I just got a phone call for a giant company, $20 million company, and they're like, we want your help. We might want to make you the fractional CMO. And we're having all these marketing chats. And after a 20-minute conversation, it came straight back to the relationships of team, like just the genuine relationships and what's on the inside. And so even if you're an entrepreneur in any level or any stage of business, the thing that I would tie these together with before we have them do takeaways, and I'm going to flip them, and Andi, you're going to go, and then Lauren will go on golden nuggets, is that those relationships, in order to be embodied and applied out, need get to be implied in first, right? And that's really the game. And I think about it as like being the best leader as an entrepreneur. If you have a kid, you understand this. It's not they listen to what you say, they watch what you do. And there is no perfect game in this. It's really, like, quite frankly, stumble. And even John Weiland, who's one of my men's teachers, the way that he says this is the best. And he's like, do you want to know what the masculine's job is? The masculine's job is to say yes, know it's going to break, apologize, and say yes again. And I'm like, yeah, that's what it feels like, right? And it's like you put a bumper on the bowling alley and you're like, here's our relationship. Here's how we communicate. Here's how it works. Then one of us whips one down and knocks the bumper over. And we're like, oh, that didn't hold the ball. Let's put a new one up and put a new one up and put a new one up. And it really genuinely is a muscle. And I believe, and I will die on this hill, that the thing missing in entrepreneurship, the thing missing in business, the thing missing in, quite frankly, everything that we all do as entrepreneurs is depth. And this is the game of being depth, like being seen. Like we talk about it with customer journey. What are the things that humans need to take action? They need to feel seen, heard, and respected. Well, yeah, 1,000%. Oh, that's the same evidence that we get to give ourselves to be able to embody that. Like we get to see ourselves and hear ourselves and respect ourselves and make adjustments. And I don't know why I feel like doing this, but there's an incredible song about this. It's from Muscalain Bloodline. It's called 1090. And it's like a relationship song, but I feel like it's every relationship. Like sometimes you have 10, sometimes you have 30, and sometimes the other person has 70 and has 80. And it doesn't mean that you aren't both bringing 100% to the table, that somebody can else fill your needs. But in the game of team, and team being your interpersonal relationships, you, like, who's in that inner circle for you? Like, who are those top 5 people that when you have your worst day, you call them? Because on that worst day, those people might be able to give you the 9 to that 10. But then once those are filled, like, who's in your next bucket, right? Is this your team? Is this your people? And then the same thing with your customers, the same thing with your clients, the same thing with connections. And it's flexing these muscles over and over to create these opportunities. And so I'm genuinely tickled that somehow we ended up in therapy again today, and my bucket's all full and like clear of awarenesses. And so this is what we do over here on the pink couch, or whatever we want to call it. So Andi, we're going to shift gears real quick and we're going to let you drop a golden nugget on everybody.
Okay, so a really good friend of mine, Marie Alexandra, of whom you know, her and I often, like, we've gone through a lot of struggles. We've been in the big depths of each other, like sitting here and talking about, like, why is my business not growing? And we're seeing these people that maybe have different values than us, or that have, like, don't have the same knowledge or experience or expertise as us, and their business is growing. And we're like, how the heck? And it has been through years of us going through this journey together, and me becoming like an IFS informed coach, of really understanding and realizing that when we, so in a business, there's the two things. There is the not knowing enough of the actual things to do, like the actual tactical, right? Thing is the tactical you can learn pretty much anywhere from anyone online. If you're still stuck after you have learned the tactical, it's quite often something that is in you. It's something that's in you. It's something that has gone on. And when we're looking at this from internal family systems, we're looking at this from a piece of, if there's things that happen to us as a child, and they're from a child's perspective. So I have worked with people in business that were struggling they wanted to be more out there in social media. And I can think of 2 individuals in business that I did this with, absolutely different reasons as to why. Interesting though, both neurodiverse kids, their brains thought differently as children, and the way that the one reacted to a lot of the environment around them was a lot of overwhelm and everything growing up. And there was different things that then had them decreasing their ability to speak up in social media. There's so many different things in business. So many things can happen, and a lot of them do rate down to the stuff that has happened to us when we were younger. So if you have been trying everything, you know, the tactical stuff, and then, you know, you're working on this customer journey stuff, which is gold. You're working on your customer journey. You're building these relationships with people, and stuff's still happening. And you know that there's people with less customer journey input going into it than you are. Start diving into your stuff. It's not easy, but oh my God, is it worth it at the end? Well, there is no end line. You just start peeling those layers and go, ooh, I got this big layer out here done. And then you're like, oh, there's another layer. I can work on another. And you just become a better and better person, better and better leader. And your business starts to build and grow. And you're like, oh my gosh, it wasn't mythical, you know?
I love this, and I want to tie something that came up at the event because Andi, I love this, and for anybody who's like unfamiliar with IFS or internal family systems, like I highly recommend you go find a 15-20 minute YouTube video just on the awarenesses of them, because when you start to understand the parts and how it works, it starts to bring this awareness. And Andi, you hit a very valid point. And Marie Alexander, I love you, girl. If you're listening to this, just know I love you. When you start to bring these awarenesses into the game, and Andi, you hit this point, and even myself, like there's a point, and I'll be very open about this, like in 2020, where I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life, like stupid amounts. And God's like, oh, you're not going to be a good steward of it? I'm going to take it all away. Right? Got it. And then there's this quote that comes through me all the time of like, well, if you've done it before, you can do it again. But just because I had it one way doesn't mean that I was this new version to have it back again. And those inner stories and those inner dialogues of like, well, I know the tactic. I know the thing. Like, I'm doing the same boxes. Look, my funnel looks the same as theirs. Like, my emails look the same as theirs. But what it's missing is us. It's missing that part or that piece where we don't know what our specific DNA is, right? Even when I teach customer journey, I tell everybody, I'm like, I'll give you the science. The science is hitting these frameworks. The art is your delivery of these things, right? And that art is the part that we're finding. And TJ, who we will have on the podcast, who's in our alliance and my best friend, is an absolute NLP master. And what I found, and he has this really good question, is these stories that we tell ourselves that prevent us from having it. And one of the most profound questions that he asks, and I use it all the time, is when you find that story, just ask yourself this one question. When did you decide that to be true? When did you decide that story to be true? Because those stories don't serve us. But once we have an awareness of where it is and where it came from, and we're like, I decided then, we can start to rewrite a new story or start to tell ourselves a different story and put those practices. And so, Andi, I absolutely love that, and I appreciate it. And for people wondering too, because these books come up for me all the time, and I think knowing this, Benjamin Hardy and Nicole LePera, there's a lot of IFS that's built into their work, but from the lens of just actually getting into the practice and uprooting it as you're in that practice. And so this would be one of those times where I'm like, hey, if you haven't read Personality Isn't Permanent or How to Do the Work from Nicole LePera, this might be the time to go dive into those. And I'll give one distinction. If you feel like, I'm not like, I don't have big T or little t trauma, or there's anything going on, like I'm just like stuck and I don't know like what actions and behaviors to take, read Personality Isn't Permanent. If you think about that story of like you have an emotional charge, or I feel like a failure, I can't figure out what's underneath this, I would go to Nicole LePera's How to Do the Work, which tends to have a little bit of like weeding of those stories and those traumas mixed in. And so I would highly recommend that. So Andi, thank you for saying that so much.
My pleasure. Have you also tried the book, the new one by Richard Schwartz, who created IFS, called You Are the One You've Been Waiting For?
Yes, I have it in my stuff. I just haven't finished it yet, but I will.
That's the one that ties both of those books a little bit together.
Well, there we go. Ash, I know Ash already wrote those down. So everybody just do what Andi says. Like, I'm just over here like blabbering my gums over here. Do what she says. What is it? You are the one you've been waiting for?
You are the one you've been waiting for. It's actually technically a relationship book, but when you're reading it and you think about your relationships with everyone, so in business, friendship, like personal, like dating relationships with your kids, and you start seeing that gives you the best picture of really how all that does tie in.
I love it. Thank you. All right, Lauren, gear change, golden nugget for you. Drop it, girl.
So it kind of ties into Andi's in some ways. So that's, we didn't plan this. I don't know how this happened. But my nugget is, and this comes from personal experience the last few months, there's no specific cookie cutter way to run your business. At the end of the day, there are only different possibilities and different ways we can have different outcomes. But a lot of people look online and they see these businesses and they say, oh, if you just do it exactly this way, then you're going to make $1 million. That's not true, because the difference between you and them is that you're a totally different human being. And a lot of people sell this notion of, hey, just do it my way. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not true. That's not how it works. So if you think that, you maybe are not quite clicking or not quite like, why can't I do it George's way? Or why can't I do it Ashley's way or Andy's way? Well, because you're not supposed to. You're supposed to do it your way. And I think that the things that really pop up in that situation, the reason why people are like, oh, I'm not successful, is because they don't have their systems down. They don't have their habits down. They don't have their mindset down. And when you have all three of those things, you're able to really focus in on how you're supposed to run your business. And so at the end of the day, it's not a cookie cutter approach.
Mm-hmm. I got to be really honest. The moment you started saying my way, and this isn't a complete non sequitur, I was singing Usher's My Way in my head. Like legitimate throwback, totally just aged myself.
Not Frank Sinatra?
Lyrics completely inappropriate for the context of entrepreneurship, but I'm just like my way, my way, my way. And Lauren, I appreciate you saying that, because you also are somebody that literally, and I know this from your client roster and our mutual friends, have been behind the scenes of so many industries and types of business, and even in the vein of apparel, right? Mm-hmm. And it's different every single time. And I recorded a drop on this for the Alliance this morning called Heart Before Strategy. Thanks, Ash. Heart Before Strategy, to where genuinely, and I just want to tie a bow on what Lauren said, because we're all uber familiar with the love languages, right? And I think it's the easiest parallel that has made this make sense to me. And when I keynote about this, because I just did, I'm like teaching customer journey, and it's about doing it your way. And I was like, but we can all agree, like the 5 steps: acknowledge, prepare, project, pre-handle, excite, are like touch, quality time, gifts, acts of service, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, but if I tell you how I touch my woman and you go home and touch yours the same, you might get a black eye, but we can agree that touch is the important principle. Mm-hmm. And so even in the lens of business, and this is why I tell people, and I'll be blunt about it, avoid people that give you plans and gravitate to people that give you frameworks, because frameworks allow individual expression. And so even with what Lauren is saying, you can cookie cutter, you can copy, you can look at for inspiration, but your specific DNA and the DNA that's in alignment with you at the deepest level is what's going to make it work. Because I have a lot of one-on-one clients, and they're like, George, I want my one-on-one clients like you have them, where like you don't have standing calls and it's not on the calendar every week. And I was like, yes, but like that works for us because of the nature of our relationship. We're texting throughout the week. We're like, I'm flying to Croatia for their wedding. Like we're there. And I was like, but for you, that same cadence might not work, but you're still helping with the same outcome. And so I think the most important part, especially what Lauren said, and she said it right at the beginning, is protecting the outcomes and staying focused on the outcomes, but not necessarily being romantic about the path to get to that outcome, being unique in your expression of that journey to get to that outcome. And so you might not take a straight line, and we've all seen that success graph, right? Up, down, backwards, sideways, front. But like, just because I've walked on a couple stepping stones, I wouldn't even recommend you walk on mine. I'd recommend you make your own, because you might just win the game of Squid Games and hit all perfect tiles in a row, or realize you could have walked down the middle of it and skipped the skipping stones. And so there's so much weight to what you said, Lauren. So I thank you for saying that, especially with the breadth of experience that you have.
Of course, absolutely.
All right, Ash, you want to put a bow on this? What you got to add?
I was just thinking as Lauren was going, just about following your process. And like a very tangible example is like, this is the first time I've ever had so much alone time in my entire life with Nick going to school. And my first thought was, I have to spend it all perfectly. I have to know how other moms are doing it and how other entrepreneurs are creating it and doing it. And so immediately I'm on Pinterest, like looking at working mom schedules. And I was like, at what point are you going to realize that you're trying to collect evidence and trying to build somebody else's vision, thinking that their shoes are going to fit your lifestyle, when in reality, it's not going to work for you. Mm-hmm. And everything that you've ever done has always been your version or your way. And so that just like tied together so many like thoughts for me that I was just like, oh yeah, like we get to repeat that one for sure.
I love that. You always have this way of like and Pinterest for mom schedules. Like I didn't think that one was coming. Like I'm a big fan of that one. Because to
Yes.
publicly acknowledge you, one of the things that and I'll say this on the podcast in front of everything, Ashley's probably taught me more about doing it my way than anybody I've ever seen because of her basically steadfast commitment to her boundaries and her growth. And even in how we communicate. I mean, we've been through it all. George, don't text me. Put it on Slack. We'll back to text. Don't text me after this time. Okay, here's my email. Here's my autoresponder. Nope, you can't share that. Now you can share that. And like genuinely, one of the best embodied examples because life changes. And as a mom of a son who's getting older and now is in school, that he got accepted to the lovely school that she wanted him in, which is amazing. Now that time is there, but those same outcomes or quote unquote boundaries or ways that were there even 2 weeks ago before summer was over are completely different than they are now. And this is the power of space and really giving ourselves the ability to create autonomy in our businesses and in our life, and specifically intrapersonally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically to the level of like how we're setting ourselves up to fill our bucket, to be in alignment with us, to then apply that into our business. And even if you work in somebody's business, right, it's prepping you before you get on the field every day. And you know, it's so funny in like consulting so many companies, it's like the employees that we celebrate, the ones are the ones that create new ways to accomplish the same goal and get that same outcome, and we get to apply those same principles to ourselves, right? Like if we're still doing things the same way 6 months from now, a year from now, I really feel like we should all pull the emergency brake system and be like, I need to break something right now because this is not going to continue to go where I want it to go, and being willing to make those adjustments. But also like, and this is going to sound so silly, but I'm not artistic. Like I can't even draw stick figures, and all three of you are going to laugh at me like obsessively in a minute. But you know, like when you see these gorgeous paintings on the wall and you're like, I don't understand how somebody can do that. I literally thought somebody sat down and was just like, this is what I want it to look like. And that's the painting that came out. And then I have a few friends that are painters and I was watching them in process and I was like, there's like 700 layers of paint under that final image. Like it's layered
Mm-hmm.
and layered, and they mess up and they paint over it and they adjust this and they adjust this. And I feel like that's the level of life in entrepreneurship, is that the only time you lose is if you stop putting new brushstrokes on it, because there's absolutely no way to make any beautiful painting by just looking at it and being like, this is what I want it to look like. There's depth and layers and texture. And like, I just think of Bob Ross. He's like, oh, that's a seagull. Nope, I'm making it a tree. Right. And then there's another one. And then there's another one. And I feel like that's the easiest metaphor for my brain to understand, even the vein of what we're talking about today, community. Right. You're going to make a painting and everyone's like, I want that painting. And then it's going to end up looking 10 times different. And I've done one of those wine nights where you like paint with the person. And I will tell you right now that I've never seen 6 different reindeer in my life as those 6 reindeer. And all of them technically were reindeer, but everybody's reindeer looked completely different. And how we got there was different. And I think that that's the most beautiful place, whether it's in community, whether it's in your relationships, like Andi talked about, is like what you're agreeing to is that like, we're going to make this canvas together. Is we agreed like these are the colors we want, yeah, and then you adjust and you adjust, and I'm like, hey, can we add some pink? Or right now my hair's blonde because all the pink bled out, and I'm like, can we bring some blonde in? And you just make these adjustments, and as long as you keep making them and making microbites, whether it's in your business, with your customers, with your community, with your team, with yourself, that progress is protecting our path to the outcome, and the outcome is what we're after. And that outcome should feel a little scary. It should look a little bit different, right? I'm in one of those where I'm like, I just got a phone call and I was like, oh, I haven't been in this bucket before. You want me to be what in your company? And I'm over here like, and I'm having like flashbacks to entrepreneurship and consulting 6 years ago. And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, God put it on my plate. So maybe the answer is yes, let's figure it out. But that's a different canvas than I've been painting on. And it's one that I'm willing to pick up the paintbrush on and be like, where do we go and how do we get there? Or like the fact that I'm flying to a wedding in Croatia for my friend's wedding. And they're like, we did the seating arrangements. Just so you know, we sat you at the table with 3 potential future clients and we did it on purpose and we've been seating you the whole time. I'm like, wait, am I flying to Croatia for a wedding to pitch? That's new. Let's go paint in this bucket. Let's go figure out where we are. And I think that that's the most important undertone out of all of this. And so Ashley, thank you for adding that weight and those pieces. And ladies, before I forget, because my ADHD brain over here, Where is the best place for people to connect with you? Obviously, we're going to have it all in the show notes, but like, where would you prefer? Like, if somebody wants to reach out, ask you a question, give you kudos, give you love, and Lauren, I'll let you go first.
So I have a new account that I am taking publicly, and it's learn.with.lore. So my nickname is Lore, Laur.
And what? So it's okay. Can you spell that again?
It's learn with.lore,
Okay.
Laur.
Okay. Learn.with.lore on Instagram.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so you have my permission to slide into her DMs. We're all going to force you to do that. So, I mean, you have her permission too, but go slide into DMs, send her something you're grateful for, ask her a question. Andi, what about you?
My website has all my socials, so it's just easy to go in there and check. So my website is andiclark.com, Andi with an I. So ANDICLARK.com. And my podcast websites, all that's there, so they can, however, DM me, email me, whatever works for you.
Find me. Just find me. Just come take the first step in the relationship, and then I'll respond and I'll build one with you. And so I would highly encourage and recommend, because these two ladies are breaths of wisdom and knowledge and examples and embodies and all of it. And yeah, I'm just grateful for you two being here today and like doing this. And I just want to do this because I feel called to do this, but I just kind of want each of you, Ash, Andi, Lauren, any closing thoughts, like how you want to wrap the show? Like, you've heard me talk on the podcast, like we just men in blacked them and they forgot everything they knew, but we had an incredibly deep and connected conversation. And I would love all the bows of wisdom to come from you three, because the women deliver it way better than I will. And so either one of you want to go first? Andi.
So I have just a quote right here that I have always behind me. It's so expensive mentally and physically to feel that one thing is true, but to be acting like another thing is true. So that's by Mark Butler. And I just, let everybody sit with that.
That's a good one. That tickled. Okay, Lauren, what you got?
I think just remain true to yourself. Whatever version of you that is, just remain true to yourself.
I'll take it. Ash?
I love the paintbrush analogy, and I would love to just echo off of it that you have the power to paint a new picture every day.
And they just all came in with short zingers, and I'm not even going to dilute any of them. I'm going to leave the zingers. So you're going to sit with Andi's, you're going to feel Lauren's, and then you're going to take Ashley's invitation. And that's where we're going to land the plane today. And so, for everybody listening, just thank you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this. Thank you for being here. Thank you for investing in yourself. And my invitation is, if anything tickled, if anything landed, if anything shifted your perspective, that let today be the day that you take action on it and recognize that you're never in this game alone. And whether we can help you just in DMs or in our alliance, or either Andi or Lauren can help you, or Ashley can help you. If you need a kick in the shins, if you need some love, if you need some gratitude, if you need some affirmation, like whatever it is that you need, come grab it and get that bucket full so that you can pick up that paintbrush and go paint this canvas of your life, your results, and your vision, because there is no other you. And you are the most important part of it. And so if we can support you in any ways, you know how to get a hold of us. So thank you so much for listening to another, quite frankly, crazy episode of the Mind of George Show, where the safest parts of my brain are shared with you, because the rest of it belongs in a straitjacket, which we can all agree with. And so I haven't said that one in a hot minute, but I felt called to share that today. And so remember that relationships will always beat algorithms, especially the one with yourself. And so we will either see you in the next episode, or you will hear us in your earballs. But either way, we're out.